What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to Movie Emporium's spoiler-filled / ending explains of Ghostbusters Afterlife, the newest film from director Jason Reitman. Now, before we begin, as always, if you like what you see, hit that subscribe button to join Movie Emporium, hit that notification bell at the top to find what's coming next. If you like any of the videos, awesome, hit that like button, as well as commenting below on any video that you watch, including this one. So, as I always do, just a word of warning, this will get into everything about this movie. I'll do a non-spoiler review at the beginning, and then I'll go into spoiler territory. So if you have not seen this movie, which I know a lot of people do, please watch the movie and then, come back to my video. So, Ghostbusters Afterlife, to kind of get into a non-spoiler review of it, is really difficult because there's a lot of spoiler stuff, there's a lot of nostalgia in this movie, a lot of product placement. But if we were to break it down to what the nuts and bolts is, it's a continuation of the Ghostbusters franchise. It's about a family who are being evicted from their home, who are played by, of course, Carrie, Coon, Mckenna, and Finn Wolfhard, and they travel to their, recently deceased grandfather's house, who lived in Somerset, Oklahoma, who basically abandoned his daughter in a really interesting, unfortunate way. So she's not really happy with him, but she needs a place to live. She needs a place for the family to live at, and so on and so forth. So they travel there, and of course, the kids start, forming themselves into this town. The Mckenna character meets a character named Podcast. There's, Finn Wolfhard's character of Trevor meets this girl that he becomes attracted to, works for the place, and so on and so forth. But because this is a Ghostbusters movie, there's paranormal activity, there's seismic readings and stuff like that. This is where Paul Rudd's character comes into the mix, and it becomes a story about who is this family, how are they connected to the world of Ghostbusters, and the stuff that starts happening, how is it connected to the original 1984 movie, and what exactly is going on with this town. And that's kind of where you have to leave it. Like I said, there's so much nostalgia in this movie that it would continue to completely spoil the movie. So if you don't want to know anything about it, at this point, that's kind of the synopsis of the movie. Family moves to Somerset, Oklahoma, to be at their dead grandfather's house, and paranormal activity starts happening. So I've been a huge Ghostbusters fan for as long as I can remember. I saw the first one in the theaters when I was like 2 years old. I'm that old at this point. But it's a movie that has always stuck with me with a lot of people, where I feel like it's the perfect comedy. It's up there with Back to the Future and Caddyshack, where these movies are... There's something really authentic about it, really fun. There's a lot of innuendo in a lot of these movies, but they have so much charisma, so much heart, so much humor, that they just become a ball of just great energy. And then on top of that, these are star-making roles for Dan Aykroyd, Bill Murray, Harold Ramis, Ernie Hudson, Annie Potts, of course, Rick Moranis, and just it kept going on and on and on. But it was just a fantastic movie, and I actually really liked the second movie. I'm not going to lie. I think it's a fun, entertaining film, not as good as the first one. And then the video game came out, which was a continuation, which was fine. And then, I'll be fairly honest, the last movie that came out, I don't think is as horrible as everyone else thinks, but that's just my honest opinion. So, this movie has been delayed 4 times now. It was supposed to come out last year in July 2020, and my anticipation for this movie has been growing and growing and growing ever since I continue to hear about it, hearing what may be in this movie, having the fact that, people saw it at New York Comic Con and said it was great, it was entertaining. It was that perfect scenario where I put in my top 10 list. I was just super excited for this movie. So the thing about this movie after walking out of it is and so for my review, I know I'm going to lose a lot of people on this non-spoiler review, and I'll talk about in spoiler fill exactly what I mean. But I think my anticipation for this film was way too high, and with that said, I think I went in with this expectation, this anticipation for something that I was never going to get. And I think I wanted a film that was going to call back to some portions of Ghostbusters. But what I ended up getting with this film, to not spoil anything, is I think I got too much nostalgia out of this film, which, they sometimes say nostalgia can kill a film in a lot of aspects. And I don't mean that you can't put nostalgia in a film like this, because you have to give the audience who will remember the original film, who love it, some reason to really enjoy this film. But my thing about these movies, and this is with a lot of films that deal with nostalgia, is Jurassic World the same way. You can't rely on nostalgia. Yes, you have to play into it, but you have to allow the characters, and I will say this about the characters in this movie, I think Mckenna Rice is absolutely fantastic in this movie. I think she is a breakout star in this movie. She's been doing this for quite a while now, but the things that she has to do in this movie, that way she has to mold her character to kind of fit into this world of Ghostbusters, is really kind of entertaining. It's really energetic. It's kind of awesome, to be fairly honest. And the fact that they kind of gave her a partner, and what was really interesting about the fact they gave her a partner, the partner is very similar to a character in Gil Kenan's Monster House, which he co-wrote this. And it really feels like these two characters are pulled out of that universe, but pulled into a Ghostbusters sense. So in essence, these two characters together make a really dimensional kind of duo, and it really does work when they start kind of uncovering the mysteries of what's going on in this town, and they start getting some of the things that we're really nostalgic about. It's a really fun scenario. I think it really works on a really cool, really fun thing for kids as well, because it's very kid-centric in who the main characters are in this movie, and I think McKenna Grace does a really nice job. I think on the other side of the stance, I think like Finn Wolfhard is fine. I think he's a little too one-dimensional in this movie. He's that kind of character that was very similar to, I think it was like The Turning or something, which I really hated, where he feels kind of like a little bit of a douchebag, a little bit of a jerk in a lot of aspects, and I don't know why he keeps being written as characters like this, because he comes off, and you saw this in Stephen King's It, the movie he was in. He has the ability to be a good actor, but I just don't find him very charming in this movie. I think he's very off-putting in a lot of aspects. How he treats his sister, how he treats his mom, and how he eventually puts himself into with this girl that he really likes that he finds in Somerset. It's just a really one-note character that I really wasn't on board with. And it's the same thing with Carrie Coons and even Paul Rudd to an extent, where Carrie Coons has the particular spot on who she's related to and how she fits into this Ghostbuster universe, but she's barely used. We're talking about a woman, an actress who was fantastic in Fargo. She was also, of course, in Avengers Infinity War Endgame as, I think, Proxima Midnight, and she was fun in that. It's really strange to see her kind of left on the side and not really given much to do. She's the love interest, of course, Paul Rudd's character, who is funny in the movie. He really is, but he's just really not given much to do. He's like a seismologist trying to figure out these earthquakes and stuff like that. But I never felt he was giving. He was kind of almost reined in, like he was just not allowed to be funny. And with a person like Paul Rudd, he's able to have the humor as well as have the drama, and it just doesn't work here. And when you see how his character plays out and how Carrie Coon's character plays out, you're almost like it's not deserved in a lot of aspects. And I don't know, I was really kind of bothered by it, but that's just this whole movie in a nutshell, where because it relies on that nostalgia, because it tries too hard to make you feel like you should be watching something from the original Ghostbusters, or like I said with Jurassic World, that it doesn't be its own movie. There's points in this movie where, for instance, how it gets to the central storyline is so quick and so haphazardly done and so slapdash. It just doesn't feel like a fun movie. And on top of that, there's like no real humor in this movie, which is what makes Ghostbusters and Ghostbusters 2 really stand out, is that, that back and forth, that, ridiculous nature of what's going on. When the things start happening with the paranormal stuff, it really feels like there's something like really missing, or like there's an extended cut that they're going to put out. And it just doesn't feel like a cohesive whole. It just really feels like it's leaning on nostalgia, or leaning on the many product placements in this movie. And in the end, I just wasn't really a fan of this movie. I really wasn't. It just didn't really hit me. And that's why it's really depressing when I get into my spoiler-filled stuff that I even want to like downgrade or degrade this movie for it at least trying to be something that, was trying to appease the fans, but I really think it didn't work. So, and I'll kind of leave it there as, for my non-spoiler take on this film. If you don't want to hear about the spoiler stuff, I will tell you there are 2 credit sequences in this movie, which actually are perfect in every sense and form. I think they're actually quite amazing and actually are funny in a lot of aspects and have some really kind of interesting heart to it. So definitely stick around for the mid-credit sequence and the end credit sequence, because it leads into some really interesting territory. So with that said, if you want to leave it there, thank you so much for watching. As always, comment below, what you think of this movie and so on and so forth. So Ghostbusters Afterlife, like I said, is a very nostalgic driven, very much like Jurassic World movie. It relies so heavily on the Ghostbusters 1984 film, and believe it or not, a little bit of the Ghostbusters video game. It actually almost doesn't even mention the Ghostbusters 2, to be fairly honest. That it almost kind of buckles under its own weight. And what I mean by that is this movie starts out Somerset, Oklahoma, we have a man who we know, I won't say just yet, but we know who it is. It's very obvious who it is. He's running away from this mountain. We see the big beam of like the proton pack beam is shooting up into the clouds. And there's a trap, the trap they trapped the ghost with in the seat of the car. There's something chasing after this man, and we go to this farmhouse, which is the main location in the film. And this man is walking up, and he stands at the edge of his porch, and something of a apparition or something like that starts walking forward, and this guy tries to press the trap button, but nothing happens. It leads into the house. It leads to this man putting the trap into the floorboards and stuff like that to hide it, so on and so forth. And then they do the Dana Barrett sequence with the terror hounds, and basically the terror hounds, the creatures that Dana and of course Louis Tully ended up becoming, come out of the chair. And the reason I talked about all this, and the reason I kind of went with the opening sequence, and I'll kind of keep it as condensed as possible, is they took a moment which was actually extremely horrifying and scary, and actually it scared me as hell when I was a kid, and almost just kind of made it an afterthought. Now, when you do nostalgia, you have to have a purpose to nostalgia. You have to have a purpose to the concepts and ideas of that nostalgic point, because if you're using it like what happens in this movie, it just feels like a cheap gag, a cheap tactic to make you feel something about the 1984 Ghostbusters. And I don't hate it for what it's doing, but that sequence in its own right is the major problem of this movie. The instance of the simple fact that he's pulled up with the terror hound arms and stuff like that, and then he eventually dies, which is the grandfather. He eventually dies, is so infuriating to me. I just don't understand what people don't understand about what it takes to do nostalgia. And it was that kind of stuff in Jurassic World, which I'm just like going, you're really cheapening the franchise. You're not giving the franchise what it needs, which is its own movie to continue the franchise. Yes, you can throw the Ghostbusters in there, which they absolutely do. You can throw the main central character, the grandfather, which I'll tell you now is Egon Spengler, into the mix, and that's perfectly all right. You can add little subtleties here and there, which, there's a point where you see a Twinkie and a Nestle Crunch Bar and stuff like that, which really harkens back to it. I'm fine with that because there are those little, ticks and stuff like that, which really help out Egon Spengler's character. But stuff like that chair and stuff like, the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man characters and stuff like that, who don't really have anything to do. And like the young podcast kid at the very end of the movie, he's using the PKE meter, which somehow has a way to retract creatures and ghosts and stuff like that, and he's using it to destroy the little Stay Puft Marshmallow Mans, which I was really hoping they'd be cute and funny, and they're more just like gremlins in this movie. They really have a purpose, and they show up just wherever they feel like. But he starts destroying them, and then he comes out of the car, and he's just full of goo and full of marshmallow, and it's a callback to the original Ghostbuster movie, and that kind of nostalgia stuff is just, they're just putting in there to make you feel like you're back in the 1984 movie, and I don't want that. I actually wanted a movie that didn't do so much nostalgia, and that's exactly what happens. And there's stuff like that all over the place. For instance, on the farmhouse as they're driving in, there's that saying that I think Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis say in the movie, the original Ghostbuster movie, when they're in the jail. They're referencing stuff too, because this whole town was created by Shandor, so they're referencing stuff to Shandor. And I was really kind of looking forward to that stuff. I had heard that Shandor was going to be a big part of this movie, and he was going to be a huge influence of what this movie is doing. And I thought it was going to be like, this is the birthplace of Shandor and his kind of creation of Gozer. And they would reference back to New York and stuff like that when they do. But it's all over the place with this movie. It's just all over the concepts of like, we're just going to throw nostalgia in there for nostalgic purpose. There's a part where, for instance, there's just so much product placement in this movie, especially with Walmart, where Paul Rudd's character, the seismologist, is being chased exactly like Louis Tully is chased in the original Ghostbusters movie. And the problem with that is it looks exactly like he's being chased. For instance, the terror hound, the hellhound, or whatever you want to call it, runs through the glass, kind of scutters a little bit, and then runs after the Paul Rudd character, and he forms himself into Paul Rudd, stuff like that. And it's the same thing with like the instance where Louis Tully, there's a really funny sequence in the original Ghostbuster where Louis Tully's like, his stuff's all all tattered because now he's like the gatekeeper, keymaster, whatever it is. He's laying down with his leg up and stuff like that. Like the two just had sex, which is what happened. And in this movie, we see Paul Rudd's character, which it was kind of funny, but he's doing the exact same pose, and he has a sunflower. And there's a point where, of course, Carrie Coon is now the other character, is the Dana Barrett character, and she walks up, and it's like, that is just, I don't know. It's funny. It's because Paul Rudd's in it, and, you know, Carrie Coon, they're playing, they're talking like the Terror Hounds or whatever, but it just doesn't, it just feels like another tacked in moment. Like, we're just going to throw that in there. Like, Ivan Reitman's like, you know, it'd be funny. Let's reference back to the moment when Louis Tully's just come off as being not a virgin anymore. And I don't know. Maybe I'm just becoming too old and too cynical in my time, but that's this movie's major problem. It's just, it feels like it's trying to be too nostalgic, and it's not trying to be its own film. It's trying to be like the original Ghostbusters. And then on top of that, they add in stuff which, unless you play the video game or unless you remember anything about that it would not make any sense. For instance, they have a gunner seat in this movie, which is in the original, or in the Ghostbusters video game. They have the thing, the mask they wear to like check ghosts and like that. It has a photograph thing. Where is that in the original? Like, none of that makes any sense. They talk about the steel girders and stuff like that. There's like really random nostalgia points that come into this movie that just like, I'm like going, oh my god, they're trying to go deep, but they're just doing a very good job of referencing and doing a very good job of doing the nostalgia stuff. But my biggest problem with this movie is the fact of using Gozer and the fact of Shandor. Now, I was hoping this place was the birthplace of Gozer and the Shandor cult and stuff like that, which it kind of is, but the way it tells the Gozer story, and before it gets into like the real end of this movie, it honestly plays out like the original Ghostbusters movie. It turns into one huge nostalgia piece where the ghosts are flying all over the place. There's the one that gets in the coffee house, which actually looks like very similar to the ghost that was in the cabbie in the movie, you know, the one that was driving the man, stuff like that. There's points where like the munching ghost is just eating things, and you know, they're flying all over the place and so on and so forth. And it's actually not even as interesting or even cohesive as whole that makes any sense. But, you know, like I said, they try to make it really close to what the original Ghostbusters movie was. But, you know, that kind of stuff is just like almost lazy writing. It almost is like the Star Wars: The Force Awakens or Jurassic World, where they're doing something slightly different, something slightly unique, but in the end, they're taking the same shell of the movie, the same concept, and they're just kind of slightly changing it to where we have different characters, but they're related to some other characters, and we're using that concept to just do another movie. So this is almost like a reboot of the original Ghostbusters movie, but with the original Ghostbusters in this movie. It's a really kind of frustrating thing to watch, because I honestly would love an original tale that is not Gozer and Gozerian and Shandor. Maybe they wanted to just complete the story and they felt this was a good way to continue it or complete it, or however they're doing it, based on the last end credit sequence, however you want to look at it. But I don't know. I felt like it was just all these things that were mixing together with the nostalgia. And on top of that, this has more product placements than a Michael Bay movie with like Baskin Robbins and Walmart and stuff like that. It goes on and on and on. In the end, I feel on top of that, the story doesn't hold up against anything. It feels like a very convoluted, but in the end, there's nothing there. Like I said, you know, we watch them fight a ghost like they did in the original movie and use a trap, which apparently there's a trap that's on a wheels now, stuff like that, on a RC car type of thing. And, you know, we're going to do the thing where they find the first, you know, ghost in a very interesting area and stuff like that. And we're going to, you know, see the big, you know, cloud in the sky with the beams and stuff like that. It's trying to be like Ghostbusters 1984 too much. And I don't know if Jason Reitman was trying to honor his father and his father was too busy trying to instill himself into this film with Jason Reitman. But, you know, there is a cool sequence where Mckenna Grace's character, which I don't know how she's able to hold on to the proton pack because she's so small and little. And then, you know, you watch the Ghostbusters and they're just like, these things are so heavy. So I don't know how that concept works. I don't know if she took things out of it to make it work. Because, you know, I'll tell you what, what goes on there, but it's just funny when they're like using a proton pack to try and get the ghost, and when they use it for the first time, and they actually do some really cool things where they make the proton pack, start up, and you hear like the machine mechanics and stuff like that, and seeing like the Ecto One. There's some cool stuff in there, but it's just when it comes to nostalgia, but it's very slim and nil and whatnot. Sometimes it goes too far, I guess. So as we get into the ending explains of this movie, as Gozer is coming down on the farm, as the Terror Hounds are approaching, the proton pack that Finn Wolfhard is using is no longer working because the Stay Puft Marshmallow Mans have somehow just invaded everything. We get the point where the big clap happens, and that is when we get Peter Venkman, Bill Murray, Raymond Stantz, of course, Dan Aykroyd. Thank God Winston Zeddemore, Ernie Hudson's character, is right next to him, because you know how that ended up happening with Ghostbusters. And they're there to stop the day, and yes, it doesn't go very well. They try to cross the streams as a nostalgia point, which is not really referenced very well, and nothing goes well, and then all of a sudden everything, McKenna Grace gets the proton pack, and she has the help of her ghost grandfather, and we see a digital form of course, Harold Ramis, and they are able to stop Gozer, and that's pretty much how this movie ends. It ends with, the reuniting of the original Ghostbusters, which is fine, which is fun, which is, a little bit of a tearjerker because, the Harold Ramis character is able to get his send-off for, leaving everything and unfortunately passing away. And the thing about it I don't like is, it's very typical of these types of movies to have these main characters who are beloved just kind of show up at the very end of the movie, kind of just be there. They come out of nowhere. Like, how did he convince all these guys to do what they, how did Raymond Stantz convince everyone? It's one of those plot hole situations where I guess you just kind of have to go with it, and I don't know. I didn't like it very much. But I like seeing them there, so it was kind of nice. But, overall, that's where the movie ends. They trap Gozer, and everything's hunky-dory, and, Ernie Hudson's character actually takes the Ecto-1 back to New York, and all that good stuff. But it was a very weird moment. It's just meant for the fans to be super excited that these three guys came back. It's very hard to get Bill Murray to do anything at some points, and that's the end of the movie. And it was really a weird send-off. It was a really weird ending, but it said like for Harold and stuff like that. So it's a little cool ending, but it's very plot hole, very just fan driven, just meant to bring him back. So, and that's it. That's the movie. It's in a nutshell. That's a spoiler-filled take on it. But there's also one other thing you have to talk about, which is the mid-credits and end-credit sequence. And the mid-credit sequence I actually really enjoyed, because if you remember the opening to Ghostbusters, you remember the test. The poor kid who kept getting shocked every time he would test. Peter Venkman was hitting on the girl. Well, here we have Peter Venkman and Dana Barrett. Sigourney Weaver comes in. I'm like, where is Sigourney Weaver in this movie? And of course, this is where she is. It doesn't necessarily say if she is together with Peter Venkman or they just kind of are friends still. But she initiates the test on Peter Venkman's character, and he seems to be getting all of them right, but she shocked him anyway, which is pretty awesome, kind of 180 on the whole situation, kind of getting back at Peter Venkman. And we find out he's like marked the cards and stuff like that, but it was fun to see them too, because they've always been characters that have good dimension and work well together as an actor and actress, and it was a lot of fun seeing them and so on and so forth. But the end credits sequence at the very end of this movie, as soon as all the credits play, is really interesting, to be fairly honest. It wasn't something I was expecting. Apparently Winston Zeddemore, after the whole entire team broke up and Ghostbusters became no more into the ether and stuff like that, Winston Zeddemore became a suit. He became very wealthy, very famous for whatever he was doing. It doesn't explain it. But he's talking to Janine, the secretary, the Andy Potts character, and he's like telling about, how he kept Ray afloat, how he kept everyone afloat because he really wanted the team to stay together in some fashion, how he helped out, of course, Egon Spangler. And he rolls the Ecto-1 into the firehouse, which apparently was... There's a really funny joke in the movie where Raymond Stantz talks about an actor who bought out Tribeca, turned the firehouse into a Starbucks. And of course, that actor was Robert De Niro. He started Tribeca, so that's a really funny joke. That's an inside joke that I thought was actually really clever. But he rolls the Ecto-1 into the dilapidated the firehouse, which I'm like, where's the Starbucks at? But anyways, at that point, I'm starting to think that Ernie Hudson's Winston Zeddemore maybe start up another Ghostbusters unit. I don't know. I don't know if they're like aiming for a sequel, but it shoots down to the Ecto container, or the unit, the trap unit, the one they put the ghost in, and it starts blinking. Now, remember what happened when the last time it blinked? It caused all the ghosts to, fall out. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if they're shooting to maybe have the new movie play in New York, have new characters, whatever they're trying to do. But it was a really interesting send-off. It really leaves open a lot of questions about what exactly Ernie Hudson is doing as a career. And it's nice to see the firehouse. It's nice to see the car and stuff like that in the firehouse, because that's the nostalgia stuff that you want to see, because it is an end credit sequence. So I thought it was really interesting. I thought it was cool to see Ernie Hudson, who finally gets some good material, because after what happened to him because of the Eddie Murphy situation, because Eddie Murphy was supposed to be originally in Ghostbusters, it's nice to see him get the kind of last moment in the movie, just kind of get that, here we recognize you as a Ghostbuster, Ernie Hudson, and so on and so forth. So I really like that. But with that said, that is my full review of Ghostbusters Afterlife, my spoiler-filled ending explains. Talking for a while, but I had a lot to say about this movie. I will say this, it's still a fun, entertaining movie. It has fun moments. I really like Mckenna Grace in this movie. I think she does a fantastic job. I think the other actors are serviceable, but I think it's a movie that tries to do what it can, but it goes too far sometimes. So that'll do it. That'll be my take on the Any Explained spoiler-filled discussion of Ghostbusters Afterlife. Thank you so much for watching. Comments below. What is your affiliation with Ghostbusters? How do you feel about it? Were you really excited, or were you not excited? Did you see this movie? What did you think of it overall? All that good stuff. So let me know in the comments below. But otherwise, if you like what you see on this channel, hit that subscribe button to join Movie Emporium. Hit that notification bell at the top to find what's coming next. If you like any videos, awesome. Hit that like button, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.